Welcome to Hidden Dread. On the endless American highways, where the night is darker than ink and silence stretches like eternity, truckers carry not just cargo, but secrets, nightmares, and tales too disturbing to forget. Tonight, we dive into one of the most bone-chilling accounts ever told by a trucker. A story that doesn't just creep into your thoughts, it gnaws at your soul. This is not fiction. This is not a campfire tale. This is a true trucker horror story, and once you hear it, the road will never look the same again. Paragraph 1. The night stretched endlessly across the American Midwest, the kind of night where the stars refuse to shine and the moon seemed swallowed by the thick clouds. A heavy silence blanketed the highway, broken only by the low growl of an 18-wheeler engine pushing mile after mile of asphalt behind it. Inside the cabin sat Daniel Hayes, a seasoned trucker who had seen more lonely nights on the road than he cared to count. But tonight felt different. He didn't know why yet. He just knew something wasn't right. Daniel had started his route from St. Louis that evening, a long-haul delivery bound for New Mexico. He was used to the monotony, gas stations that looked identical, diners that smelled of burnt coffee, and long stretches of empty road where nothing ever seemed to change. But as he rolled deeper into the night, he noticed the scenery becoming unfamiliar, almost hostile. The tree lines grew taller and darker, the highway lights fewer and farther apart. His headlights cut through the mist that had begun to roll across the road, and in the shifting fog, shadows seemed to move in ways they shouldn't have. He tried brushing it off, telling himself it was fatigue, maybe a trick of the eyes. Truckers lived on black coffee and too many sleepless hours. Hallucinations weren't unheard of. Still, something gnawed at him. The CB radio on his dashboard crackled, spitting out static for a moment, though he hadn't touched it. It was turned off. Daniel frowned, reached out, and twisted the dial just to be sure. The switch was set firmly to off. Yet the sound had been real, a hiss of static like someone trying to speak through broken frequencies. "Not tonight," he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes before focusing back on the endless stretch of pavement. As the miles slipped by, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Every time he glanced into his side mirrors, he swore he caught fleeting shapes in the fog. Too tall to be human, too distorted to be anything he could name. When he checked again, nothing was there, just empty road. But the unease stayed with him, crawling up his spine like icy fingers. At one point, Daniel noticed something bizarre. His odometer was ticking up, but the mile markers on the side of the road weren't changing. For almost 20 minutes, he kept passing the same sign over and over again, mile 43. Each time his headlight swept across it, the number was burned into his brain. Mile 43. Again and again. The gas gauge on his dashboard hadn't moved either, though he'd been driving for hours. He felt the first pang of true fear then, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who had weathered blizzards, drunk swerving into his lane, and near-miss accidents in the dead of night. This was different. This was something he couldn't control. Daniel finally decided to pull over and stretch his legs. He eased the truck onto the shoulder, letting the massive vehicle hiss to a halt. The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing in on him from every direction. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and looked around. Nothing but fog. No crickets, no rustle of wind, no sound of distant cars. Just him, the truck, and the suffocating stillness. That's when he saw it. Far down the road, maybe 100 yards away, a figure standing in the fog. At first, Daniel thought it might be a stranded motorist, But the figure didn't move, didn't wave for help. It just stood there, watching. "Hey!" Daniel shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally in the mist. No reply. The figure took one step forward, then stopped. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if testing his reaction. Daniel's heart began to hammer in his chest. He stepped back toward the truck, fumbling with the door handle, eyes locked on the shadow in the fog. The figure stepped closer. Daniel scrambled inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. He threw the truck into gear and stomped the accelerator. The engine roared, the headlights cut deeper into the fog, and the figure vanished. One moment it was there, the next gone, swallowed whole by the mist. Breathing heavily, Daniel forced himself to calm down. "I'm just tired," he muttered. "That's all. Just tired." But no matter how many times he repeated it, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he'd seen wasn't finished with him. As he drove on, the CB radio crackled again. Only this time, it wasn't static. It was a voice, faint, whispering. Daniel. His blood ran cold. Paragraph 2. Daniel gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned pale. The whispering voice had said his name, soft and deliberate, like someone leaning close to his ear. He flicked off the CB radio again and again, shaking it in frustration, but the voice still echoed faintly, blending with the static. His breath grew shallow. He had driven these roads for decades, but nothing like this had ever happened before. He couldn't decide what was worse, the idea that the radio was malfunctioning, or the darker possibility that something else was speaking to him. The fog outside had grown even thicker, as though the world itself wanted to disappear. His headlights struggled against it, illuminating only a few yards ahead. The highway stretched forward endlessly, no signs of exits, no towns, no gas stations. It was as though the world had shrunk down to just him in the truck, moving forward into nowhere. Then it happened again. The same road sign flashed in his headlights, mile 43. His heart nearly stopped. He had been driving for over an hour since the last time he saw that cursed number, but here it was again, mocking him, frozen in time. Panic crept in. He rolled down his window, letting in the cold, damp air, desperate to prove to himself that this was real, that he wasn't losing his mind. But the air smelled wrong. Sweet, metallic, almost like rotting fruit mixed with rust. It clung to his lungs, thick and suffocating. Daniel gagged and rolled the window back up, shuddering. Minutes dragged like hours. His eyes darted between the mirrors, and that's when he saw it again. This time, closer, the figure in the fog. It stood on the shoulder of the road, only 20 feet from the truck as it passed. Daniel's stomach lurched. He could see more details now. It was impossibly tall, its limbs long and crooked, its head tilted unnaturally to the side as if broken. Though its face was obscured by the fog, he was certain it was staring at him, watching him. Daniel floored the accelerator. The truck roared, gears grinding, but even as the vehicle surged forward, his side mirror betrayed him. The figure wasn't shrinking into the distance as it should. No, it was keeping pace. Somehow, impossibly, it was there beside him, no matter how fast he drove. "Get the hell away from me!" Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. He avoided looking at the mirror again, eyes locked on the road ahead. Sweat poured down his forehead, dripping into his eyes, stinging, but he didn't dare blink. The CB crackled once more, louder this time, and the whispering voice returned. But now it wasn't alone. There were many voices, layered, overlapping, chanting in unison. A chorus of whispers, hissing his name, repeating it over and over. Daniel, 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 until his very soul quaked. His mind spiraled. He thought of his family back home, his daughter's laughter, his wife waiting for him to call. Was he losing his sanity, trapped in some cruel hallucination of the road? Or had he stumbled onto something that had always lurked in these forgotten highways, waiting for a lonely driver to cross its path? Just when he thought he couldn't endure another second, the fog ahead parted slightly, revealing something that made his blood run cold. The glow of the diner's neon sign flickered weakly in the distance. Salvation, or so he prayed. He slowed the truck, heart pounding, and pulled into the gravel lot. The building looked ancient, almost abandoned, its neon letters buzzing erratically. Eat. Only that one word. The windows were dark, and no cars sat outside. Daniel climbed out, leg shaking, and made his way to the door. The silence was unbearable, and though the diner seemed deserted, he swore he felt eyes on him from every direction. He pushed the door open, the bell above it chiming faintly. Inside was dimly lit, smelling of stale coffee and something rancid. Then he froze. At the far booth, in the shadows, sat a man. Or at least, something that looked like a man. It wore a trucker's cap and flannel shirt, but its skin was gray, stretched too tightly over its bones, and its eyes glowed faintly red in the dark. Been a long night, hasn't it, Daniel? The figure said in a voice that rattled his chest, a voice he recognized. It was the same one from the CB radio. Daniel staggered backward, his heart in his throat. He hadn't told anyone his name. No one could possibly know he was out here. The figure smiled, thin, sharp teeth glinting beneath the diner's flickering lights. You should have stayed on mile 43. Paragraph 3. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears as he stumbled backward out of the diner. The figure in the booth never stood, never moved, but its gaze clung to him like chains, dragging dread deeper into his chest. He burst through the diner door, gasping for air, and scrambled back toward his truck. His boots slipped on the gravel, his hands trembling as he climbed inside and slammed the door. He jammed the key into the ignition, desperate to escape. But the truck didn't start. The dashboard flickered, the radio blared static, and every gauge spun wildly. He tried again and again, but the engine only groaned, refusing to come to life. Then, amidst the chaos, the CB radio snapped into clarity. This time, there was no whisper. There was a scream, a guttural, otherworldly wail that filled the cabin and pierced straight into his bones. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside his head, vibrating through his skull. He shouted in terror, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. And then, silence. The engine roared to life on its own. The headlights blazed. The truck surged forward, though Daniel hadn't touched the accelerator. He was no longer in control. He gripped the wheel, trying to steer, but it resisted him like something else had taken hold. The semi barreled down the highway at impossible speed, fog tearing apart around it, the world outside dissolving into endless blackness. Daniel's reflection in the windshield caught his eye. At first it was his own face, sweaty, pale, terrified. But then the reflection smiled. His real face did not. His reflection's eyes glowed faint red, just like the thing in the diner. No, Daniel whispered. No, no, no. The reflection mouthed the words back at him in perfect sync, except for the last one. Mine! The steering wheel jerked violently, dragging the truck across the empty road. Daniel screamed, fighting with all his strength, but his arms felt weak, powerless against the invisible force guiding the vehicle. The truck thundered toward the mile 43 sign again, the same one illuminated in the headlights like a mocking beacon. The CB radio crackled to life once more, but this time it wasn't just one voice or even many whispers. It was a roar of thousands, an unholy chorus chanting in unison, a single message that shook the truck down to its bolts. You never leave mile 43. The truck veered off the road, crashing into the dark trees. Daniel braced himself, the world erupting in screeching metal and shattered glass. Pain exploded in his chest, and then everything went black. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was still sitting in the cab of his truck, but the world outside was gone. There was no highway, no diner, no stars or fog, just endless darkness stretching forever in every direction. The odometer read 43. The fuel gauge was frozen. He turned to the passenger seat. The figure was sitting there, smiling. "Welcome home, Daniel," it said, voice dripping with finality. And in that moment, Daniel realized a terrible truth. He had never escaped. He never would. He had become just another story, another victim swallowed by the cursed stretch of highway known only to a few truckers who whispered about it in hushed tones. Mile 43. His truck was still out there, they said. Some nights, drivers catch a glimpse of his headlights in the fog, a phantom semi-rolling endlessly down the same stretch of road. And if you listen closely on the CB radio, you might hear his voice, screaming for help, trapped forever in the nightmare of mile 43. The Dread Never Sleeps subscribe to Hidden Dread.